My name is Marjorie Haynes, and I'm 68 years old. I was rinsing out a coffee mug in my son's kitchen when my phone chimed. The message glowed on the screen like a small, polite command. "Mom, don't forget to finish the leftovers in the fridge." For a second, I thought it was a joke. Then I noticed the photo Sophie had posted a minute earlier. Evan in a new navy suit, Sophie in a black dress, Ben grinning between them at a restaurant with white tablecloths and glasses that caught the light. Oak and vine. Everyone smiled at a table I could picture by heart because I'd checked their hours last week, wondering if maybe we'd go together. Everyone looked happy. Everyone except me. Because I wasn't there. I set the mug down too hard and it clicked against the sink. The refrigerator door hummed beside me, cold air licking my wrist when I opened it and stared at a plastic container of last night's pasta. Dense and congealed. I reached for it, then stopped, my hand hovering above the leftovers like a referee unsure of a call. I told myself I was being oversensitive. I told myself they probably thought I was tired. But a new voice, quieter and older than my own, asked why the seat with my name on it had been cleared without asking me first. I ate a forkful of pasta standing at the counter because I didn't trust my knees to carry me to a chair. The sauce tasted like what you do when you're trying not to waste food. I rinsed the plate and wiped the counter, a domestic ritual that should have soothed me, and yet the hum under my skin wouldn't quiet. The kitchen clock ticked loud for an ordinary afternoon, the kind of suburban sound that makes time feel like a polite guest who refuses to leave. Ben's soccer cleats sat by the sliding door, one slightly tipped like a tired horse. On the refrigerator, Sophie's sticky notes lined up in a neat column. Mom, water, the philodendron. Mom, pick up dry cleaning. Mom, thaw chicken thighs. They were written in a gentle, looping hand that made every request look reasonable. I liked order as much as anyone, but lately those notes felt less like help and more like assignments pressed into the palm of someone who wasn't being asked whether she had the day to spare. I told myself this arrangement had been my decision. After Harold died 10 years ago, I sold our little house in Riverbend and moved in with Evan so I wouldn't have to wake to an empty place that smelled like aftershave and cedar drawers. It felt practical at the time. We pooled some of the sale money toward a bigger house in Maplewood, a place with a guest room that quickly became my room, and a basement where we kept boxes labeled Christmas, camping gear, and Mom's books. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself this was family. On the kitchen island sat an envelope with City Development Office printed in block letters across the top. I flipped it open, thinking it was another brochure about recycling bins or street repairs. Inside was a letter about property redevelopment in Riverbend and a buyout number that made my pulse hitch. $380,000. I reread it to be sure I hadn't added a digit with wishful eyes. Then I saw my son's name listed as the recipient. Under it, in smaller type, a line that made the floor tilt. Power of attorney. I sat down on the nearest bar stool as if I'd been told to. I tried to remember when I had signed anything like that and came up with blank air. I have signed birthday cards, insurance renewals, permission slips for field trips. I have signed checks for groceries and for an emergency plumber who arrived with his own coffee and the wrong wrench. But I hadn't signed away my signature. The door opened and closed, and Sophie's perfume reached the kitchen a moment before she did. "Oh, good, you're here," she said, like the sky had confirmed itself as blue. "Ben's practice moved to 5. Could you take him? I have to run by the clinic to cover an hour. Just an hour." She kissed the air near my cheek, dropped her purse, and was already halfway down the hall. "Where's Evan?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Meeting," she said over her shoulder. "Big one." "You know how it is." I nodded because I did know. Evan had always been chasing something just out of reach, even as a little boy at the county fair trying to catch a ring over a bottle with his tongue between his teeth. He thinks if he just leans far enough, the prize will fall into his hand. I wanted to hold up the letter and say, "Explain this." I wanted to ask when a son becomes the person who keeps his mother's name in his pocket like a key. But Ben barreled in, cheeks pink, and threw his arms around my waist. "Grandma, Coach says I'm on defense tonight." I hugged him and said, "Then we'd better lace up tight," and slid the letter back into the envelope as if it might stop existing if I hit it well enough. Ben's laughter bounced off the tile, and for a minute I believed the right thing was to do the next right thing: fill the water bottle, find the shin guards, drive to the field on Maple Street, where parents stood with coffee cups like small shields. When we got home, I made chicken and green beans. The house smelled like garlic and pepper. Evan and Sophie arrived breathless and bright from the dinner I hadn't been asked to join. Smiles still stuck to them like price tags. "How was practice?" Evan asked, ruffling Ben's hair. "Mom, did you eat? There are leftovers." I said yes to both and watched them move through the kitchen. Practiced as dancers who know where the other will step. I wasn't angry, not yet. I felt something else. A slow suspicion that the life we were living looked like a family from the street, but didn't feel like one from the inside. I cleaned the counter once more, ran the dishcloth under hot water, wrung it out, and hung it straight. Then, because I couldn't unsee the envelope on the island, I took it with me to my room. That night, I read the letter again. I checked the numbers and dates until they floated. When the house went quiet, I placed my handwriting beside the signature on the last page by the pale light of my bedside lamp. My J has always curved like a fishing hook. The one on paper was a straight line, impatient and wrong. I looked at my hand, at the little sunspots clustered near my thumb, and understood the truth that had been standing in the doorway all evening, waiting for me to invite it in. The next morning, I called the county clerk's office and asked the woman who answered what you ask when you don't want to accuse your own child of something bigger than a mistake. I told her I needed to verify a signature on a power of attorney form that had my name on it, but not my handwriting in its bones. She spoke softly, as if we were in a library. She told me to come in. The waiting room had chairs with cracked vinyl and a fake ficus tree that had gathered a season of dust. A man with a stapler sat behind a glass window, and beyond him were stacks of folders the color of old oatmeal. When my number blinked, a clerk with kind eyes led me past the counter into a small office and asked for my ID, then the papers. She studied them and asked me to sign my name on a blank sheet. I did. She compared the strokes the way a teacher compares homework, patiently, without any pleasure in catching a mistake. "This one was notarized," she said, tapping the form with a careful nail. "But the signature isn't consistent with the sample you just gave. We'll flag it and open a review. If you want, you can file a statement contesting the validity." The room swayed a little, the way it does when you've stood up too fast. "Yes," I said. "I want." I wrote the statement at a desk that had been carved by bored hands. I wrote slowly, the way you do when words need to weigh enough to hold you. When I finished, the clerk slid me a copy for my records and told me the review would pause any transfer connected to the document. I thanked her and walked out into sunshine that made the parking lot look like a newly washed plate. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to Riverbend and parked in front of the small house where Harold and I had once argued about curtains and laughed until we were too tired to keep laughing. The paint had peeled in slices along the porch rail. The lilac bushes drooped a little like they were listening for the old voices. I sat there, hands on the wheel, and asked the empty porch for advice. It offered me silence and a breeze that smelled faintly of cut grass. I found a studio apartment near Willow Creek Community Center that afternoon. It wasn't much. One window, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a stubborn faucet. But when I turned the deadbolt for the first time, the sound felt like a promise I could keep. I carried in a suitcase and the photo album I'd taken from my closet shelf, the one with Evan's gap-toothed second-grade smile and the picture of Harold teaching him to ride a bike with his hand open, ready to catch, but not holding on. I called Evan that evening. He didn't pick up. I tried again and left a message that said I was staying with a friend for a few days and that the county clerk had questions about a form he might know something about. I told him I loved him. I did not say I was angry. Anger has a way of making a mess of what you're trying to save. At Willow Creek the next morning, a flyer on the bulletin board announced an open session of Silver Voices, a storytelling circle for seniors. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee. A dozen of us sat in a circle of metal chairs, each with a name tag lettered in a shaky hand. When it was my turn, I surprised myself by telling them about the message, the leftovers, the envelope, the way grief can disguise itself as helpfulness, and how a person can wake one day to discover she has been helpful for so long she forgot to ask for help in return. After the session, a woman named Nancy touched my arm and said she used to teach contracts law at the community college. She offered to meet me for coffee and talk me through the next steps. Not as a lawyer, she was retired, but as a neighbor who believed in tidy paperwork and tidy hearts. We sat in a diner with a cracked sugar shaker, and she drew me a map on a napkin. Report the forgery. Notify the city development office in writing. Request a hold on any disbursement, and document every conversation. You're not trying to punish anyone, she said. You're establishing boundaries. Money is just the easiest boundary for some people to understand. I went back to my studio and wrote 2 letters, both careful and factual. I mailed them and kept the receipts. I opened a new notebook and titled it Riverbend Maplewood, then listed dates and who had said what. I am not a list maker by nature, but there is steadiness in a line of ink you put there yourself. That night, I slept without dreaming. It felt like stepping to the edge of something and discovering there is floor, where you feared only air. In the morning, my phone rang. Sophie's number glowed. "Marjorie," she said, and her voice was thin the way voices get in a hallway. "Ben's sick. He's burning up. I don't know what to do." I was already on my feet, keys in my hand, before we hung up. As I locked my door, I felt the hinge of my life shift, like a gate beginning to swing, and I knew whatever came next would not return things to how they were. It would show us, finally, who we were willing to be. The drive back to Maplewood felt shorter than I remembered, maybe because every light turned green as if the world were in a hurry to see what I would do. When I reached the house, Sophie was pacing the porch in her scrubs, a phone pressed to her ear. She looked smaller than usual, her voice shaking when she saw me. "He's in his room," she said. "I can't get the fever down." I went straight to Ben. His cheeks were flushed, hair damp and sticking to his forehead. He whimpered when I touched him. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, pressing the thermometer against his temple. 103. "We're going to the hospital." Sophie started to protest. "They said to give him Tylenol and wait," but I'd already wrapped Ben in a blanket and lifted him, the way you lift something sacred that can't bear a jolt. In the car, I talked to him about clouds and soccer fields until the ER sign glowed ahead like a landing strip. Inside, St. Mary's. Everything smelled of disinfectant and panic disguised as professionalism. The nurse took him right away, and I followed, answering questions with the precision of someone who's been answering all her life. Sophie trailed behind, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. When they settled Ben in a curtained bay, I touched his forehead again, and he sighed, the sound small and forgiving. Hours blurred. Machines beeped in steady rhythm. Sophie and I sat in molded plastic chairs outside the curtain. She leaned forward, elbows on knees, and murmured, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Her voice was genuine, almost raw. I wanted to believe it. Then her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen, hesitated, and answered. I wasn't trying to listen, but her voice carried in the sterile air. "Yes, the doctor says he's stable." "No, she's here." "Of course she's here. Look, if she drops the case, the funds will release sooner, and we can still close before the rate lock expires. No, Evan doesn't know I'm calling you. Just trust me." The words landed like pebbles in water, each one rippling outward until the whole room trembled. She turned and saw me standing there. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I was trying to fix this," she whispered. "You don't understand how close we are to losing the mortgage." "And you thought lying would fix it?" My voice cracked on the last word. She looked down. "I'm sorry, I just wanted a future for Ben." "So did I." The curtain rustled as the nurse returned, breaking the moment. "He's resting," she said. "You can see him now." Sophie went first. I followed. But the room tilted, the edges of everything sharpening and dimming at once. My heart fluttered. A bird beating against a closed window. I reached for the rail of Ben's bed and missed. When I woke, the light was softer, filtered through a slatted blind. The steady beep I'd heard before was now for me. My left hand tingled. A nurse adjusted the monitor and smiled. "You gave us a scare," she said. "Transient ischemic attack. A warning, not a sentence. You're lucky." I turned my head. Through the half-open door, I could see Evan talking to a doctor. His shoulders were bowed, his suit jacket wrinkled as if he'd been sleeping in it. When he came in, his eyes were rimmed red. "Mom," he said quietly, taking my hand. "Ben's okay. Sophie told me everything. The house, the paperwork, everything. I don't even know what to say." "Say you'll make it right." I murmured. "I will. I already started." I withdrew the application, canceled the transfer. "I'm calling the city tomorrow." Relief washed through me, not because of the money, but because for the first time in years, he sounded like the boy who used to run to show me the perfect shell he'd found at the lake. I squeezed his fingers. Outside the window, dawn pressed a pale stripe across the blinds. The world was still moving, ordinary and unstoppable. I thought of leftovers cooling in a fridge somewhere, waiting for someone to notice they were still good. The morning after they discharged me, I sat in the passenger seat while Evan drove, both of us wrapped in the polite quiet that follows too many apologies. The hospital wristband still clung to my arm, the plastic biting softly against my skin. I stared out the window at rows of brick houses, porches strung with wind chimes that clinked like hesitant words. We didn't go straight home. Evan parked instead outside a notary office on Main Street. He turned off the engine and held out a manila folder. "This is the new deed," he said. "I added your name, joint tenancy. I wanted to do it before you even asked." For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. The folder felt heavier than its paper could explain. "You don't need to." "I do," he interrupted. "I lied to myself thinking I was protecting you. I was protecting my comfort. You've always been the one holding things together. I forgot you shouldn't have to hold us too." His confession loosened something in my chest. "Evan," I said quietly, "you're still my son, but I can't come back to live under the same roof. I need to know who I am when I'm not the person everyone depends on." He nodded slowly, a small crease forming between his brows. "Then let me help you find where that is." 2 weeks later, I moved into Willow Creek Independent Living. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and possibility. There was a window that faced a small garden, and at 7 each morning the groundskeeper's radio played soft country songs while he trimmed the hedges. I hung my pictures: Harold on the boat, Evan as a boy with a tooth missing, Ben with his paint-streaked hands. For the first time in years, the walls felt like they were waiting for me, not the other way around. Nancy stopped by often. She brought a box of calligraphy brushes and said, "If you can write your own name again, you can write your next chapter." We laughed, and I began to practice the strokes until the ink flowed smooth as breath. Some nights, I joined the Silver Voices circle and told my story, not the scandal of it, but the small, beating truth inside. That love without respect is like a house with uneven floors. You learn to walk it, but one day you trip. Evan visited on Sundays with Sophie and Ben. The first time, he carried a pie from the diner, still warm through the box. Sophie's smile was nervous, but she reached for my hand when she greeted me. "I've been seeing a counselor," she said softly. "I want to do better, for all of us." I believed her, not because of the words, but because of the tremor of sincerity behind them. After they left, I placed the pie on the counter, cut a slice, and sat by the window. The sunset painted everything in copper light. I thought about how people talk about second chances like they're sudden, miraculous things, but they're not. They're slow, quiet rebuildings, handshakes, signatures, shared meals. Outside, someone in the courtyard was humming. I dipped my brush into the inkstone and began another piece for tomorrow's class. The first word I wrote was respect, the second was peace. 3 months later, the world had softened around its edges. Sundays became our ritual. Evan and Sophie would bring Ben to Willow Creek, and the three of them would spill into my small kitchen as if it had always belonged to us. Ben loved feeding crumbs to the ducks by the pond behind the building. Sophie brewed coffee and fussed with the pie tins. Evan read the community bulletin board, laughing at the idea of a line dancing for beginners class. We always ended up sharing lunch together. Not fancy, just sandwiches, fruit, and whatever leftovers I had in the fridge. This time, as I set the table, Evan looked up and smiled. "You really do like leftovers, huh?" I smiled back. They remind me that good things don't lose their worth just because they've been set aside for a while. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Ben giggled, crumbs on his chin. When they left that afternoon, I washed the plates slowly, letting the warm water run over my hands. The apartment was quiet again, but not empty. Through the open window came the scent of fresh rain and distant laughter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt free. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.